In episodes 20 and 53, we learned about basic form analysis and small forms. Now it's time to continue this discussion with larger forms. Today's focus, the sonata form. Welcome to Music Student 101. And now your hosts, Jeremy Burns and Matthew Scott Phillips.
All right, welcome back to Music Student 101.
Welcome.
Hey, Matt, what's going on, man?
End of the semester stuff. You know, it's a busy time. We're getting ready to end the weirdest semester ever.
The weirdest semester ever. The likes of which no one has ever seen.
Yeah. I'll be hoping next year it goes a little better than this one did on a variety of fronts. I'm sure I'm not alone in that.
Yeah.
How are things going over there?
Things are going well, man. Gearing up for Thanksgiving. It's gonna be a very simple Thanksgiving. It's just gonna be me, Heather, and Chloe. We're just gonna shelter in place, and it seems ridiculous to get a turkey and just have that thing in the freezer for months and months and months. So I think maybe we'll try and do like some Cornish hens or something like that. I don't know.
We got a turkey tenderloin.
Oh yeah?
Yeah, I didn't even know turkeys had tenderloins.
Do they have tenderloin? Do they?
but we got a thing on a turkey tenderloin, and it's a tenderloin looking thing of meat, and it's like, well, all right, we'll do this, and we'll do a couple of new potatoes, and we'll make a little some stuffing, and we'll do a little Thanksgiving dinner. It'll be great. We're looking forward to it. That
sounds fantastic, actually. My brother does pork tenderloins, and they're really good.
Oh yeah, we've done pork tenderloins too, and never done a turkey tenderloin, but we'll see. I have big hopes.
Yeah, right. Me too. Send me some.
Oh yeah.
In case my Cornish hens fail, I'll have backup with your turkey tenderloins.
Cornish hens, that's a good idea too.
Oh yeah. So yeah, it's that time of the year, and we're all thinking about things that we can be thankful for.
Yes, things that we are grateful for, of which there are many, even at a time like this. So
absolutely.
Yeah, maybe even more at a time like this. You know, maybe you even feel more grateful and with everything that's happened.
That's right. People probably, yeah. I imagine there's people who are learning how they took for granted some things, you know?
Right. Yeah.
One thing I will not take for granted is our wonderful listeners and some of these listener mails and reviews we've been getting, man.
Absolutely. We have the best listeners in the world who have stuck with us through thick and thin at this point. It's been great.
Yeah. We have a new review, actually. And Matt, I'm going to read this. I'm going to spell this out and let you pronounce it, okay?
Okay.
Futhojfe.
Oh, okay. Futhofi?
Or Futhoff?
Futhoff.
Or sometimes I get the idea that when people leave reviews, maybe they have to name themselves to something and they just like type in whatever.
Or it might be like a user account name or something.
Right, yeah, maybe so.
Yeah. Anyway,
this person gave us 5 stars.
Yay, thank you.
Would you like to read the review, Matt?
I will. They say, these guys are very generous to give of their time for our musical edification. Well, we're here to help. Systematic, orderly, and engaging. Somehow Matt can teach extremely basic concepts with depth and professionalism, and complicated concepts with simplicity and humility. Oh, gee, thanks.
Isn't that great?
Yeah, that makes me feel good. Jeremy has a congeniality and self-resignation, which is disarming to the listener. He has that in real life too, folks. Just a little secret from you to me. Jeremy has a certain disarming charm when you meet him in person too. Just letting you in on that.
You find me disarming?
Very disarming, man. Very disarming. They seem to assume their audience is uneducated but intelligent, which keeps it challenging but not condescending. Well, yeah, I appreciate the review. The last thing I ever want to come across off is condescending.
And I don't want to put words into Futhoff head, but or mouth. But I'm wondering if they mean uneducated in the terms of music theory. You know what I mean?
Yeah, or just saying that we take the approach that we our listeners are people who want to know more about music theory than they do. As opposed to taking the approach that our listeners are dumb and don't know anything. So we're going to school them, which is exactly the approach we are taking. The approach we take is that let us teach you some things about music theory. Hopefully,
Yeah, right.
of course you're smart. Nobody who plays a musical instrument is anything less.
Yeah, there you go.
It's not an easy thing to do.
No, it's not. Well, we get these reviews and they boost our presence on the podcasting services and
which we appreciate.
The Spotify's and the Amazons and the whatnots. So yeah, it's really helps us out a lot. So keep the reviews coming, and if you have a problem, let us know. We've had 1 or 2 little bad reviews, and we happily read them.
We've had some constructive criticism.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Oh, and some that was just mean, just flat out mean, I think.
That was just flat out mean.
I'll never forget about the drive my car into a pole. I make someone to drive their car into a pole.
Yeah, folks, please don't drive your car into a pole. Be safe out there on the road.
Take out your aggressions on the keyboard.
Yeah.
Be it your own piano keyboard or the computer keyboard to send us a message.
Yeah. Wow.
Well, thanks again for that review. And I think we can move on to our Patreon patron. We got ourselves a new Patreon patron. And since this is really, Matt, the first official theory episode, really, since
in a long time.
Yeah. So we haven't had a lot of, it's been a while since we've been having new patrons show up, but during this duration of time, David Gochrin, for example, is not necessarily new, but new to you guys, right?
Yeah.
David is a guitarist out of Ireland.
Oh, wow.
What does David have to say?
David says, I enjoy the show and listen to it often, and I've learned a lot from it, and it helps reinforce ideas that I've encountered previously. I haven't studied music in college, and I wanted something to help explain some of the ideas I've been encountering in books and from music teachers. Now, I can't remember where exactly I heard about your podcast, but enough people online were recommending it that I felt it was worth giving it a try. Those people were correct. It is a great podcast. There is a relaxed manner in your presentation, which helps me absorb information. And if things get complicated, I will often rewind the podcast and go over things again. And thank you for all the kind words. And we do recommend that you do that. Re-listen episodes. You can pause and rewind and go through things again.
Mm-hmm.
That's one of the great things about this podcast. We haven't said it much lately, but that is our official recommendation, that you, one, listen to them in order, and B, have the freedom to rewind or listen to them slowly or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
David continues, another thing I will do is hit pause and try and guess the next note or chord in an example to see if I've got the theory correct.
Now that's cool.
That is cool.
Isn't that cool?
Yeah. That's a great way to practice your ear in addition to practicing theory, right? Mm-hmm. Theory is one of those things that is difficult to remember if you aren't using it all the time in your practice. Oh, don't we know it? The parts that I don't use fade from memory, so it can be difficult to get those up to scratch again, because so much time has to be devoted to just having the technique to be able to play pieces.
Mm-hmm.
So I try to use what I've learned straight away. It's not always possible, but where it is possible, that part stays with me better. Anyways, thanks for your podcast. It's a fantastic resource. Kind regards, David. And thank you, David, for all those kind and complimentary things. And yeah, I got some interesting listening techniques going on there. Some things that we ought to maybe try out.
That's a great idea.
To pause and see if we can get the next note of the chord, and that's interesting. Those things get better over time. The more and more you do the chords, the easier they get.
Mm-hmm.
and there is a sort of a nomenclature system behind them, and the more you practice, the more familiar you are with the system, the easier it gets. And I bet David is getting to the point where he can hit those with pretty near 100% accuracy at this point, and also relatively fast, right?
Because otherwise, you're just if you're just going to try and guess the next chord without any kind of informed theory wherewithal, you might be doing that for a while. I think by the time you're actually ready to start pausing and guessing the next chord, you might
You're doing all right.
have a better
Yeah.
grasp on this than you realize.
Yeah, exactly.
So we want to thank David for writing in and for supporting us on Patreon.
Thank you, David.
We have a site, patreon.com/musicstudent101, and that's kind of our main source of income in terms of the podcast.
Only source of income in terms of the podcast is
Only, actually. Well, you got PayPal. We have PayPal donations, but
yeah, right.
We're not. Hey, we're not by any stretch sponsored or covered by any of these big corporations or anything like that.
Yeah, you guys will notice we don't have commercials of any kind. Neither the radio commercial kind nor the Jeremy and I kind. And you should try out
Can you imagine doing that, Matt?
Lemon scented hand soap. Yeah. I would refuse.
Yeah, right. Part of me hopes we'll get big enough to where they can ask us just so we can say no.
Yeah. I don't guess I've ever actually gotten Jeremy's opinion on this, but I hate commercials and everything. Just in everything and all things, and so I don't want to do it. So thank you so much, patrons, for supporting us. So far we haven't had to do this.
Right. At the very least, it keeps us in coffee and keeps the lights on, and it does
keeps
help.
us in and keeps the podcast going, which is not a zero expense project. It does help us to be able to keep this thing funded and keep it going and keep episodes coming out, and so we really appreciate it.
Yes, and we have three kind of chief tiers, three main tiers of the Patreon site, where we have our Unison members, which are $1, $2 members. They get access to all the content on the Patreon site, and we just released a new episode, by the way, which is pretty cool.
New Patreon episode.
Trying to pick that back up. So
live video of Jeremy and his band playing one of our opening theme songs, and
all kinds of little cookies and treats,
Yeah.
And then the $3 members, $3 and $4 members, we call our major thirds, and they get a coffee mug. And I say coffee mug, but we're running low on coffee mugs, and it might end up being like, I think I'm going to stick with the drinkware, right? I think we'll maybe do but maybe something a little bit lighter. Shipping on
like
a 18-ounce
thermos.
ceramic. Yeah. Maybe something less heavy than a 18-ounce ceramic coffee mug.
Yeah, like a thermos.
But yeah, we'll have something like that. And then the Perfect Fifth members, we aim to, and we promise to do an episode, your own episode, on the Patreon site. And
yes, ask Jeremy and me any question you have, and we will do a mini episode on the Patreon site where we address that question specifically.
Yes, and all we ask is your patience as we are trying to get these knocked out as quickly as we can. And we are trying to pick it back up and get back into the groove where maybe by 2021 we'll actually have a 2.0 plan for the podcasting.
Yeah, well, coronavirus really knocked us in the dirt in terms of our schedule, and so now we're behind on everything. But we're getting back into it, and with a little patience, we can keep this thing going.
We're transitioning into the development at this moment, I think.
Foreshadowing.
Dun, dun, dun. Okay. So thanks again, David. That was awesome, and we appreciate your support, all you Patreon patrons.
Indeed.
Now, normally I try and try not to read the mail, two mails from the same person. You know what I mean? When we're doing listener mails. But our friend Peter J. Casey kind of came up with something pretty cool that I think is worth listening to.
Okay.
Because we did an episode, I can't remember what the episode was, but we mentioned this kind of crazy chord, the minor major 7 chord.
The minor major 7 chord, indeed.
Okay, so if I have like F minor, for example, we have a minor chord 1, 3, and 5.
F, A flat, C.
But we add a major 7.
Yeah, a major 7 to it. So that's E natural. Yeah.
By itself, that chord is pretty.
Uh-huh.
Let's see what Peter has to say about that.
He says, hi guys, still enjoying the podcast. Keep up the great work. I just wanted to mention quickly that our forgotten friend, the minor major 7 chord, that is the minor triad with the major 7th on top, sure does sound like something from a horror movie when it's all on its own, but there's one pop rock progression where I hear it quite often, and it's really pretty. And he describes this progression as being a 1 to a 1 major 7, 1 7, so presumably 1 dominant 7, 4 major 7, and then 4 major minor 7. So in the example of C major, that would be C. And then C major 7, so with the B natural.
Mm-hmm.
And then that B natural moving to B flat for a C7. And then F major 7 with the E natural. And then F minor major 7. So that same chord, but A moves to A flat. I see.
And then I like to resolve that to 1 personally.
And then, yeah, interesting. And Peter says if you keep the 3rd on top throughout, the E in this case, nobody even notices the otherwise spicy minor major 7 chord. It's the sweetest pie.
Let's try that.
Yeah, try that.
So I got a C, I got a 1, I got a 5, I got a 1, got a 3.
Yeah, okay.
I'm being redundant with the tonic. The bass line will remain the bass line, but this middle tonic is going to move around a little bit. So
Right.
There's that 3rd on top he was talking about. So if I go C to C major 7, to C major minor 7, and then the F major 7, and then that crazy F minor major 7, and of course I like to close it out with a proper C. 1 chord.
That is pretty, and he's right. That E on the top kind of gives us this sort of anchor. We can sort of hang on to that E. And if I'm to talk about dissonances in aesthetic terms, whereas Peter's exactly right. If you just play the F or any minor major 7 chord on its own, it sounds very dissonant, very horror movie like.
Mm-hmm.
But it's amazing what our psychologies and what our brains will do. When you play E in the context of a C major chord, it's just a 3rd, right? Perfectly acceptable. So amazingly, that your brain will kind of think, well, if that E was acceptable before, I can still accept it now. Once I've gotten to this, really spicy minor major 7 chord. And the other chords in between, the C major 7 to the C7, we're just moving downward, right? We've got one voice moving from C to B flat, and then to A in the F chord, right?
Yeah.
So that's the sort of logic our brains can follow.
Yeah.
And this E just hanging out on the top of that is a sort of logic our brains can follow. So when we get to what would otherwise be a very horror movie sounding chord in this minor major 7 chord, it doesn't really sound so horror movie like to us, perhaps because we thought, well, this E has been there the whole time. It's not some it's not some Freddy Krueger note that jumped out and tried to slash us, right? It's been here. It's our friend. And when we move back to 1, like you were saying, yours like for you to do, it comes right back into consonance and it's fine.
Yeah, it's funny. So that 3rd in the upper voice kind of acts as a home base while the voice below it continues to move further and further away.
Yeah, another thing about this chord progression that I feel almost compelled to mention is the downward chromatic motion in this one voice, right? From C to B natural to B flat to A, and that is the F chord, the first F chord, the F7. Yeah. And then when that F chord goes to F minor, that A goes to A flat.
Chromatic walk down.
So in fact, a lot of the dissonances in these chords are made sort of acceptable to us by the kind of logic that we can perceive in the counterpoint. You know, so stop thinking of it vertically and think of it more as horizontally, right? You know, stop thinking of it as just a succession of chords and think about it as, you know, lines, a melodic line stacked on top of each other. One of which is just hanging out on E all the time, and then another of which C, B, B flat, A flat. You know, making his chromatic step downward, and then a couple of others doing other interesting or less interesting. Well, C to F, 1 to 4, you know, in the bass, and also making sense. So, you know, and I would encourage everybody to start, you know, sort of thinking about chord progressions that way, and then they become less just random assortments of chords lining up in sequential order, and more a kind of logical melodic sense of something you're trying to do.
Yeah, and that's not the first time that you said that. And
Probably
I think
not.
that gives to me a sense of how important it is, and not to mention it bears repeating because it's not easy to do. It's not one of those things that just comes naturally, right?
Yeah, it's kind of like looking at one of those blotches of patterns until you see the sailboat come out sometimes. You know, you just sort of start. I think in modern musical repertoire, we're sort of trained to think of chords, right? We're sort of trained to think of music as chords, 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 chords. You know, and as a professor colleague of mine once said, that's a shame because you're trained that way, and then you think that's how music works.
Yeah.
Harmony is in fact counterpoint. Really, when you're talking about a succession of chords, what you're talking about is a succession of notes of increasing pitch frequencies occurring simultaneously, and those are counterpoints. They move against each other.
Yeah.
So, and this is a great example of that. And well, you know, what is a good chord to follow the next one? What is a consonant chord? What is a dissonant chord? Well, it's all about context.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is a great example of this minor major 7 chord that you would think is an extremely dissonant chord, but in the context of the counterpoint, not so much.
Right. Another is kind of like the diminished chord, right? By itself, this is kind of ugly, but if we know we're in the key of C, and it's a 2 going to a 5 to a 1. You know,
Absolutely.
all of a sudden it makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely.
So that's a really cool thing to point out, and we want to thank you again, Peter J. Casey.
Thank you, Peter. Yeah, I know some people get frustrated with the length we take to read listener mail, and you know, start wanting to drive their cars into poles and things. But part of why we do this is really interesting musical stuff does come up in the listener mail. You know, this
on occasion,
and this is a great example.
Yeah, on occasion we do share some really good theory nuggets and some ear training nuggets.
Absolutely.
So if you have any questions or cool little things you want to share with us and the rest of our listeners, send them in to info@musicstudent101.com.
Indeed.
Now, Matt, I believe it is time to go ahead and get into this episode, isn't it?
So what are we talking about today, Jeremy?
We have a listener, Nancy Chase, who a while ago was saying, hey guys, can you please get the continue with the discussion on form and analysis?
Indeed.
I think she was a music theory student, and I guess they were studying that. And you can, even if you're not in theory, you might come across this in music appreciation, or if you just want to know more about classical music and how it works.
You're going to come across this sooner or later, yeah.
So we did on episode 20, we did form and analysis part 1, which is when we kind of talked about motives, which can you build on those to make themes.
Yeah, and build on those to make musical phrases. You know, we talked about the period and the double period, which are types of musical phrases, right? And or combinations of phrases, I should say.
That end with cadences. And then, so that was kind of the basics, the toolbox, the toolkit. And then episode 53, we did form and analysis part 2, which was small forms such as binary and ternary and their various manifestations.
Right. So periods and double periods and all those in their turn sort of combine in ways to make what we consider the small forms, the rounded binary, the sectional binary, the small ternary, etc.
And in a second, I think I'm going to brush up on those because the author of these textbooks kind of harken back to that when they're talking about the sonata form, which is what we're here to talk about today. This is large forms, specifically the sonata.
So now we're getting into large forms, and we may do one large form an episode. I think is the current plan, right? Because these take a little bit of discussing. Now, by large form, again, I feel compelled to point out, we don't necessarily mean that this lasts longer, that this takes up more time necessarily than a smaller form. There are large sonata form pieces that take 5 minutes to go through a sonata form, and there are rounded binaries that take 14 or 15 minutes. So it's not a time thing. What it is a level of development of ideas that makes it quote unquote large form. We don't really mean it takes longer or that it's bigger or there are more notes necessarily. Now, typically it probably is, right? But it's a small distinction. But don't ever think that by large form what we mean is it just takes a long time or it's just a big or there's a lot of notes. What we're talking about is level of development of musical ideas, really.
Okay.
Level of expansion of ideas.
Yeah, you kind of described it as a narrative, right? It's like a storytelling.
Sonata form is using tonal harmony to tell stories. Yeah. Now, we use music to tell stories all the time. The ballad, insert, right? The ballad of whatever.
John and Yoko?
Or the ballad of Jed Clampett or just insert. And this is using music as a storytelling. When I say that sonata form is a narrative, though, what I mean is it is the actual chord progressions, the actual periods, the phrases becoming periods and these cadences, the interplay of these cadences forming into these sections. It is these utilities by which we are actually telling a type of narrative psychologically. And that's what made sonata form so successful in the historical period in which it first started to come to be, which would be what we consider the classical era, the era of Haydn, Mozart, and on into Beethoven was where it was sort of born and first given a lot of leeway. And what made it so successful was the sense of was the sort of psychological connection it had, its ability to tell the story of two warring themes over which one would kind of ultimately triumph. If you're reading these things, what we call narratologically, in sense of a story being told. So.
Well, I tell you this, in my studies, and of course, typically I go straight to tonal harmony and harmony in context. Miguel Roig Francoli, the author of Harmony in Context, says that to truly cover these forms would be beyond the scope of this book, the entire textbook. And actually, Casca Payne said the same thing. They only briefly touch on sonatas, saying that it would take the whole course on sonatas. What?
Actually, those authors are right in that it's beyond the scope of like music theory. I mean, well, I'm holding up to Jeremy a whole other book on sonata form alone, and it is a bug squasher, man. It called Elements of Sonata Theory. James Hepikoski, Warren Darcy. Really kind of revolutionized the study of sonata form, to be honest, and a lot of the sort of philosophical ideas I espouse whenever I get on this subject. A lot of it is inspired by and comes from their scholarship. So if you're really, really into sonata form, I recommend this book, Elements of Sonata Theory.
Well, I think it'll be good to have that perspective as well as we go into this, because most everything I do comes from Francoli and Casca Payne. So
yeah.
and your own personal experience as well, Matthew. So
Yeah, because I have written sonata forms. I dove into the archives and found one just this afternoon. So
Conveniently after the fact, right? Because I was like, Matt,
Con-
do you have any sonatas I could use for an example on this show?
I'm like, no.
And this is what's been the holdup. This is what's been the hangup. I've actually had to go back and write my own sonata, which we'll get
This
into
has
that.
been the Jeremy torture of all Jeremy tortures, folks.
The most
You may not be
prolonged.
privy you may not have been privy to it, but trust me when I tell you, never has Jeremy been more tortured than with this.
You're not exaggerating. I didn't want to seem dramatic, but you're not exaggerating.
Well, there's a reason I don't have any pieces in sonata form.
And I'll be talking about that too, right?
Sure. Yeah.
But anyway, you were saying that this is the heyday was kind of in the classical era. Did sonatas continue on through romantic and all that, or
Sonatas absolutely did. So their birthplace is in the classical era, in the late 17th, early 18th centuries, with Haydn, Mozart, and Beethoven are all famous for sonata form, and they would use this form called sonata form for the first movements of piano sonatas. It used to be called, rather pejoratively, Sonata Allegro form, meaning this is the form you use for the Allegro movement, which is the first movement of every piano sonata, every violin sonata, and it was even used for the first movements of symphonies, and a version of it was used for the first movements of concertos, and for the first movement of string quartets, and for the first movement of almost everything. So and it did indeed survive into the romantic era, into the 1800s, the 19th century. It got expanded upon. It got you sort of had to quote the author of this book I was just talking about, one of them, you sort of had to buy the upgrades to sonata form. The parts got bigger and became small forms in and of themselves, and it got longer, and the rules got a lot more flexible, but the basics of the form absolutely survived into, I would say, probably into at least the early part of the 20th century.
oh, even to just yesterday,
Or even to just yesterday, given that Jeremy Burns
I want to say
has completed his.
I want to say I took some liberties. My version is definitely a more updated, upgraded version compared to what Mozart was doing, I think.
Yeah. Well, the beauty of a form like this is it leaves open the possibility of evolution, right? And I think if it didn't do that, I think we could probably, if we were to think about it, think of some forms from classical music and maybe even from other styles that sort of die because once you've done what you can do with them, that's it. And people don't just want to do the same thing all the time. So those forms, as frequently used forms, probably go by the wayside. Sonata form manages to evolve and continue to be a thing, and therefore continues to be viable.
Hey, it's funny because I think in dance music, when people are dancing to these things, you need a little bit of predictability, right?
Yeah.
Because sometimes your moves are based on certain parts that you expect.
Yes.
But no one wants to be like. I mean, I think when people listen to music, they sometimes want to be surprised, right? They want a little bit of drama. And be like, okay, well, I know that this is when the develop. Here's the. Yep, right on time. Here's the development. I wonder what's going to happen next.
Well, that's interesting. And, we talk about sonata form being a narrative, being narratological and telling a type of story. And just like in a story, you want a little bit of predictability. You kind of want the good guys to win and all that, but you don't want it to be too predictable. So a good story kind of balances those things, right?
Yeah, there's like a setup and then a climax and then a conclusion kind of thing.
Right,
There's a loose kind of recipe.
Right. And the 17th century Viennese, even if they didn't use the terms we use today, definitely knew what to expect when it came to a sonata form. Right. They knew they definitely knew what was going to happen. They definitely knew kind of how this generally worked. So composers like Haydn in particular were very adept at giving them pleasant little surprises and challenging them within that form.
Mm-hmm.
And I say I have nothing written in sonata form, but if you want to if you want to include modified sonata form as a possibility, then I have all kinds of things.
Yeah, right. Well, I tell you what, before we get too deep into the sonata form, let's brush up on binary form because
that is important.
it seems like some of these authors are comparing, a lot of theorists are comparing the binary form to the sonata form. So
yes, they are.
I know we did an episode on that, but right for our purposes right now, so no one has to go back and dig. Let's just recap that if we can. Because I could use anytime I can have this explained to me again and again and again. I'll take it, man. I'll take it.
So the binary form is called binary because there are two things, right? There's a first part and a second part,
Mhm.
and that makes up the form. In the first part, what you will have most typically is either a period, which is two phrases, one that ends on a half cadence and one that ends on a perfect cadence,
Mhm.
right? Or a perfect authentic cadence, or an authentic cadence of some kind. And then you will have a second part. Now, this second part can be something totally different, which is just another two phrases or four phrases or what have you.
Mhm.
And that will be what we call simple binary, just two things. Or you can have rounded binary, which is probably more germane to the conversation we're about to have, in which we
Yes.
have the first part, which is two phrases making a period, maybe four phrases that make a double period or whatever, and then a second part that kind of spins around, hangs out on the five of the key or something, and then comes back to the melodic material of that first part to end.
Mhm.
And so it kind of goes back to where it started. The piece as a whole does, making it a rounded binary. In that case, we will have a first part which we will call A, capital A, and within A is two phrases, four phrases, whatever. Ends on an authentic cadence.
Mhm.
And then the second part, which we will call B A or B A prime, meaning a B part that kind of wanders around or hangs out on five, and then the A prime part, which is the A part but is different in some way.
Mhm.
You know, um,
So in the binary that we're talking about right here, the rounded binary, the A is really the first part. The A theme material is really the first part, and then the
yes,
second part is actually the B and then the A prime. Is that right?
yes, yeah.
Okay.
So part one is A, and that'll be repeated, and then part two is B A prime, and that part will be repeated. And normally when A is played, that material will end either on a half cadence or it will end on a cadence in some key other than what you began on. It may end on a perfect authentic cadence in the key of the dominant or the key of the relative major. Whereas when you then play BA, it spins around and comes back to A, but that A prime, it will be different in the sense that it will then have ended in the home key, in the same key in which the piece as a whole began.
Mm-hmm.
So that you have this this statement, this place to which you move to at the end of A, and then B represents that further digression, and then A prime represents the return, and then at the end of A prime, the return to that last key place.
Yeah.
You can think of it as a Joseph Campbell circle, right? Almost of the hero's tale of starting in sort of the normal world, moving into a place that is different, but then returning to that normal world, and with the ability to change it and make it complete.
Mm-hmm. I see a lot the word reprise. Do you want to use that at all or define that?
The reprise.
Reprise?
You're seeing that in Casca Pain, right?
Francoli, but what you're calling parts, the first part being A and the second part being B and A prime. I'm also seeing referred to as a reprise. So reprise equals part.
A reprise equals part, reprise equals statement or restatement of a principal melodic motive too. You will hear that word used at that reason. So the A could be reprise one, right? And then BA, because there's a B there, be reprise two. Yeah.
Got it. Yeah. Okay. just a cool little thing I came by, and I've heard that before and didn't know exactly how to relate it to music.
And
So,
that's one of those
weird.
words that'll mean different things in different areas. When we talk about rondo, reprise will mean the repeat of the primary melody of, but let's not get ahead of ourselves. So
Okay. Well, before we get into the sonata, let's go ahead and zoom out and just get a big overall quick, like, if you could define a sonata in like a paragraph, which we kind of done.
Okay. So a sonata form, which is different from the genre of sonata, right?
Mm-hmm.
Which is a 3-movement chamber work.
Right.
A sonata form, and by form we mean the sort of the sequence of what happens when in a piece of music. As a form, sonata form is a single movement comprised of an exposition
Uh-huh.
in which 2 themes are introduced,
Mm-hmm.
a development in which 2 themes are manipulated, changed, played with in various ways,
Mm-hmm.
and a recapitulation in which those 2 themes return in the same way they did in the exposition, but they end differently. Specifically, in the exposition, those 2 themes end up moving to a different key,
Mm-hmm.
and then the development is played where the things are nebulous and played around with and suspended, and then in the recapitulation they're played again in the same order but adjusted so that they do not change key, they end in the home key of the whole thing, very much like a prime of a rounded binary. Sonata form is in fact an extended version of rounded binary.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas rather than A being a simple phrase, A is a whole piece of the music, an expanded, A could be around a binary in and of itself, or something. But,
Mm-hmm.
but it follows these particular things. So A, B, A prime, exposition, development, recapitulation, and that in effect is what a sonata form is.
That was very nicely put, man. And just to hammer it home, so like you're saying, binary meaning 2 parts. The first
Mhm.
part is going to have the exposition. The second part is
Mhm.
going to have the development and the recapitulation.
Yes.
So let's go ahead and dig into the exposition itself.
Okay.
And let's use primary and secondary terminology if we can. Do you mind if we do that?
Absolutely.
Okay.
No worries.
So let's talk about let's just get into it.
Let's just talk about, so let's talk about the exposition. The exposition is probably the most labyrinthine of these sections, right? It's probably the most detailed.
Mm-hmm.
Because what you have, all right, you have the option of beginning your sonata form with a slow introduction.
Yeah.
This is normally a slow tempoed introduction of themes of its own, and maybe those themes will come back later or not. You have the option of starting with that. You can or you don't have to.
Okay.
Uh,
Optional.
or you can do that, or your sonata can begin with the exposition, and the exposition will begin with your first theme of major importance, what many scholars will call the primary theme.
Mm-hmm.
You will also hear it called P1,
Mm-hmm.
right? And other such things. Now, there can be many themes that are considered primary themes. You can have a P1, P2, P3, when you get into these romantic sonatas where everything gets expanded. But in its simplest form, you have the primary theme. And the primary theme will be memorable,
Uh-huh.
it will be melodic, it will be in the home key of the sonata form. So if this is, if this is symphony number 5 in C minor,
Uh-huh.
then we were talking about this being in the key of C minor. It is the home key, right?
Mm-hmm.
This will sometimes end convincingly in a perfect authentic cadence, but often not. And then we will then move to what we call the transition,
Mm-hmm.
sometimes called T,
Mm-hmm.
right? And the transition is not a theme as itself of itself, whereas the P theme is melodic, memorable, divided concisely into easily understandable phrases. T, the transition, is more about building energy.
Yeah.
The notes become faster, maybe not even in the sense of tempo, but in the sense of if we were doing eighth notes and quarter notes, now we're doing sixteenths, right?
Yeah.
The harmonies, the chords will be changing more rapidly. The chord changes will come closer together. A lot of times the bass voice will be moving up. We've talked about this a lot on the podcast. The use of inversions and things so that the bass is ascending a scale. That kind of thing will be happening.
Mm-hmm.
The purpose of which is to confuse us about what the key really is, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because at the end of this transition, we are going to either hang out on a big 5 chord, or we are going to hang out on a big 5 of 5 chord,
Mm-hmm.
or a 5 of 3 chord, or something like this. Because at the end of the transition, we then move into the secondary theme, the S theme.
Mm-hmm.
And there typically are multiple S themes, S1, S2, S3. And this S theme is typically thought of as lighter.
Aha.
In the 17th century, they called it the feminine key, and that's not really super PC these days. So we don't really use that terminology anymore, right?
Uh-huh. Interesting.
Yeah, but it's considered it's considered lighter for lighter instruments. It's considered less sometimes less notable, less rigidly structured, less memorable, but not so unmemorable that you don't recognize it.
Secondary.
It's secondary. We will play through these secondary themes until we get a cadence, and often that cadence is kind of weak.
Uh-huh.
After that,
Half
after
cadence,
that,
or
it can be an authentic cadence.
it's not perfect.
Maybe not perfect, and maybe just not approached very strongly, not big cadential 6/4 to 1, kind of motion.
Uh-huh.
Because that's kind of weak, we will then have a closing theme whose primary job is to have made that cadence more prominent and give it more oomph. So the closing theme will have a lot of 5/1, 5/1, 5/1, 5/1
Yeah.
in the wrong key. Remember
Uh-huh.
that the S theme, S1, S2, the closing theme, which we call C. I don't know if Roy Fancroli calls it that. I hope I'm not mixing up my terminologies here. But the S theme and this closing theme will all be in either the key of the dominant, the 5 key. If you started in a minor key, this might be in the relative major, but in a different key than the P theme was.
Yeah.
So that we have this big 5/1, 5/1, and then sometimes even a codetta afterwards to make this very huge, very convincing cadence that was in the wrong key altogether.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. By wrong key,
And
you
that
mean
is
not the original key. We moved
not
away.
the original key.
We have
right?
modulated.
The quote unquote wrong key, because we have modulated.
Yeah.
After that, we will repeat all of that. The exposition traditionally is repeated. So we go back to that primary theme with this correct quote unquote key, the one we started in. We go through the whole thing exactly the same, note for note, P1, P2, transition, S1, S2, big closing theme, big cadence in the wrong key again.
See, when I respond like that, that means I didn't do that in my sonata. When I go, that means I probably did do it. We're going to talk about that.
But you notice the narrative aspect of this, right?
Uh-huh.
That we have started in a place and we have gone to another place. We have digressed, to use one of our favorite words, to this other key and this other place. And our goal is going to be to resolve that digression and get back home.
Mm-hmm.
Think Dorothy in the Wizard of Oz, right? She goes to this other place entirely, and what she wants to do is get home. That's and that is our kind of harmonic goal now.
But when she gets home, it's not exactly as she left it.
Although she goes home having learned some things, and we will go home having learned some things.
Right? Yeah, right. Well, okay. So is there anything left for the exposition? Right.
That's the big thing. I could go into a lot of details, and the about the things, the importance of that cadence that ends the S theme, the importance of the dominant lock at the end of the transition. For which I recommend you read a very, very good book that I just recommend, Elements of Sonata Theory.
Uh-huh.
Uh, Failing that, that is the basics of sonata form.
Okay. Well, so to paraphrase, I guess. So we have the exposition, which is what we're talking about now. We have the introduction of sometimes an introductory theme that doesn't have much as importance, but we'll go into the primary theme, which is
Mm,
which is in the same key that the piece is considered to be in. So if we're in
correct.
A major, that'll be in A major. Um,
Hmm.
Now there is a from the primary theme, there is a transitional piece that is not necessarily a hook. It's not going to be a memorable. It's just kind of building tension to get into the secondary theme.
Right.
All right, so we get to the secondary theme, and now if we're in a major key, oftentimes the secondary theme will be in the five. So if we're in A major, we want to do this in E major, right?
That's sort of your default option. Yeah.
Now I did this in minor. My sonata was in minor, and so a standard thing to do is for the secondary theme to be in the relative major key.
Absolutely.
So I did go to C major. We're going to hear that later on.
Yeah.
Um, Now, another cool little thing about the secondary theme versus the primary theme is I'm reading that the secondary theme is not required to be independent of the primary theme. Sometimes it is, and sometimes it isn't.
Um, Depending on your definition of independent, that is certainly true. Um, it it is generally independent enough that you could recognize it as being different,
Mm-hmm.
right? It is not merely a variation of the P theme. It is a theme in and of itself. But it is certainly true that it will not necessarily be, have this confident I end in a perfect authentic cadence and a key kind of thing that the primary theme, especially when you get into the 1800s, tends to have. It tends to be a little less on stable ground,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
because what it really is just a giant cliffhanger,
Yeah.
right?
Right.
I mean,
Right.
because you think about, if I use the example of a major key just for simplicity, we start off in A major, and we're in A major, and this theme is nice and easy and contrite, and we understand this perfectly. But then this transition is happening, and oh shoot, where are we going? Where are we going? And we end on this five in A major and go five, 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 and we want to hear a one, but we don't get it. We go five, 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 and go off,
Yeah.
and we're
Yeah.
in this whole other melody that's in this five now,
One big
right?
five. Yeah.
Yeah, we have gone off on this whole sort of tangent, this whole big digression, and it's a giant cliffhanger. What we want to hear is that one that's going to, end the piece, but we can't. We're not done yet.
Yeah. Right. The In the case of the monothematic sonata form, which is a thing that Haydn was apparently a big fan of,
Hmm.
the secondary theme is just a transposition of the primary theme.
Really?
That's what it says. Yeah,
I would, I would love to see some examples of that.
that sounds kind of boring, doesn't it?
Yeah. Well, Haydn was an interesting person. He would do things specifically to throw you off. He would be trying to, how we were talking about, they knew what sonata form was, they knew what was coming. Haydn would be deliberately trying to mess you up.
Wasn't it he that wrote the surprise symphony?
Yes.
Yeah, so he's all about the surprises.
Yes.
But anyways, okay, so that's the primary and secondary, and there's also mention that the connecting material, like we're talking about the transition, may or
Hmm.
may not be. It can be either dependent or independent of the primary theme. So maybe it has little
Yeah.
bits of the primary theme, or maybe it has nothing at all.
Um, in my experience, and I certainly have not reviewed every single sonata form that exists, but in my experience, what often happens is it begins the same way as the primary theme. It begins with the same melodic material,
Mm,
almost to set you up with this expectation of, this is a nice, simple little phrase that is going to end in this very predictable way, like it just did. But then it goes off on this tangent that is very much not the primary theme. It's not even a theme, really. It's very nebulous and ambiguous. Harmonically, like what key we're even in, it's very nebulous and ambiguous melodically. Where are we even in the thing? It's
Yeah.
sort of scrambling all that. And when the smoke clears, we're going to be in this other key, right?
Yeah, right. Well, yeah, I didn't do any of that. I kept everything pretty much independent of everything. You're gonna hear some in the development is when I revisit the themes, which I think is appropriate. Anyways, the half cadence can often mark the end of the primary theme of the
Uh-huh.
exposition and
Uh-huh.
segue into a secondary theme.
That is very typical indeed.
Now, the secondary theme, it is saying, typically closes with a perfect, authentic cadence in the secondary key, right?
I'm going to say that is common on the verge of being necessary.
Okay. Because there's a lot of these things that are kind of standard practice, but again, there doesn't seem to be hard rules. You know what I mean? Other than the form itself, right?
Right. Well, composers really hate hard rules, and one of the sort of tongue-in-cheek criticisms I've heard of sonata form is that literally no sonata form fits the paradigm exactly. So we have this nice, beautiful little model of what a sonata form is, and there's no such thing as a sonata form that just follows that model and does nothing different.
Mm-hmm.
This model is an amalgam of all the things sonata forms typically do. So in the one hand, no, there's not hard and fast rules, but there is some gray area where are you breaking so many rules you can't really call it a sonata anymore?
And I think you actually kind of hummed this out a second ago.
Ooh,
To close up our discussion on the
my
exposition,
condolences.
it often ends with a chain of cadential gestures, which I think is what you're talking about.
5 1 5 1
5 1. Yeah.
1 5 1 5 1 5 1 1 1, and then repeat.
5. Yeah. So, anyways, that's the exposition. That's the first part of this binary form, the first reprise of the binary form.
Yeah.
The sonata form.
Right.
Now let's talk about the development.
The development. If you were to take music appreciation in college, your teacher would probably tell you about the development. Some version of it's just craziness. It's the whale's belly. Anything can happen. Who knows? All the rules are tossed out the window, and it's just pure craziness. This is a little bit exaggeration. There are some sort of standard practices even for development. The big standard practice is that the two themes, the primary theme and the secondary theme, that we encountered in the exposition, are going to be manipulated. So they may be fragmented. You may hear just little echoes of them. Transposed, certainly. They may even be inverted. They will almost certainly be combined in ways in which they were not combined in the development. So you may have a little snippet of the primary theme, followed by a little snippet from the middle of the secondary theme or something, right?
Yeah.
The point being, these two themes are going to be played with, smashed together in new ways, and differently contrived, and that's what the development is going to be about. Harmonically, we're often uh, trans transitioning rapidly through a series of different keys. Not with this, very sort of formulaic primary theme transition, secondary theme way we did in the exposition, but just really, really quickly, just bam, bam, bam. Here's a key. Here's a key. Here's a key. Right. And these keys will often make a type of harmonic sense. A circle of fifth sense, right? So this will be the key of the six in relation to that home key way back there in the primary theme. This will be the key of the six, followed by the key of the four, followed by the key of the two, followed by the key of the five, right?
Yeah, I
So
didn't
they will be
really.
making a kind of circle of fifths. Yeah, Jeremy didn't really do this in this sonata.
No.
But
There was circle of fifths motion, but I stayed in E minor pretty much throughout most of the
oh,
development.
that's also okay,
Yeah.
right? With a lot of these, you can have the debate. Well, is he going through the key of all these things, or is this just a chord progression, a circle of fifths chord progression through these things?
Mm-hmm.
It's like, oh well, that gets you down the rabbit hole of the difference between those two things, a key and a chord progression, right? And so, yeah, you can sit around with your music theory friends and argue this all you want, but yeah, but these cycles through this circle of fifths areas is something that will often happen,
Hmm.
not all the time.
Right.
And
Yeah.
when you get into the 1900s, they definitely think of, well, what can we do other than that, right? Can we go to the key of the Neapolitan, you
Ooh.
know, or can we, even Mozart was trying to get as far away from the home key as he possibly could. He started in C and rounded up in C sharp once,
Whoa.
just to see if he could do it.
Wolfie.
Yeah, uh, and so it's a little bit anything goes, but there are some things that typically go, even in the most anything goes part of the development.
I have
And
some.
go
Go
ahead.
on. I was just gonna say, I have some terms here that I think I'd like some clarification on.
Okay.
I have a list of things that can happen during the
Okay.
development, and I'm
Okay.
hoping you can define each one of them.
Fire away.
You're rubbing your hands over there. Okay, you ready?
Yeah.
So one thing that can happen is fragmentation. What
Yeah,
is
what I said, splitting the themes up into little components.
little
So
motives?
yeah, so if your primary theme was ba da 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 dee dee da da dee da, you might get a ba da 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 ba da dum ba dee dee da da ba dee dee da da,
Mm-hmm.
ba dee dee da da ba dee dee da da, right?
Okay, so
Yeah.
stepping outside of the initial pattern.
You will taking that initial pattern and cutting it into little sections and using those.
That makes sense. Okay, so what about sequence on circle of fifths?
What I was saying about the harmonic moving through the circle of fifths from 6 to 2 to 5, and as this is happening, we will have a circle of fifths. So if your primary theme was be dee da da dee da dee dee da da dee dee in the 6, ba da 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 in the 2, ba da da in the 5, ba ba da da in the 5. Yeah,
Damn, that's pretty
that.
good, Matt. That's pretty good.
Well, yeah, feel free to mute your podcast if you want. I wouldn't blame you at all while I'm humming and singing. But
No, I could not have done that. Melodies within the harmonic, within the harmonies you're talking about. Okay, that
yeah,
makes sense to
I'm,
me.
I'm not I'm not gonna stamp those with a seal of approval or anything. But
Okay. What about thematic expansion and compression?
the themes, both of these themes, can be drawn out.
Uh huh.
Meaning, if there was a theme that was mostly quarters and eighths, it can become halves and quarters. You know, and elongated to be slower like that. It can also be compressed. So if it was quarters and eighths, it can become eighths and sixteenths.
Mm-hmm. Compressed for time or compressed for speed or same time but speeding it up a bit or
Indeed.
adding more notes, right? Giving it a
Indeed.
more busy sense.
Indeed.
And I assume that expansion is the opposite of that. Maybe?
Right. Yeah.
Okay.
Elongated. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Now, what about variation?
Um, it can be put in a different key. It can be played with a different kind of accompaniment. It can be given a different texture. Everything, all of those things that if you were playing a theme in variations, you would be doing, or variations on a theme. Any of those things are considered a variation that the theme can be subjected to in the melody. Beethoven was fond of marches in his developments. He would take his primary theme and make a march out of it.
Huh. That's
He
interesting.
did that. He did that a few times in his symphonies. Yeah.
Is it common for the development to have a different meter or a different tempo than the Exposition?
It is not common to really the sonatas I've studied, but it is certainly a possibility, especially when you get into like the Brahms sonatas and things of the 1900s. You know, the Brahms and to an extent Chopin and some of these people who were interested in working in these forms, but really kind of stretching them to their limit.
So when I switched my from the 4/4 in the exposition to 6/8 in the development, one could say I was taking a Brahmsian approach. No, probably not. Probably not.
If one was being generous, sure.
If one was being Jeremy Burns. Okay, so when you're talking about the variation, you're talking about like other instruments also. So I think when they say textural changes, that might also be what they're referring to, bringing in different
Instrument
instruments.
changes, yeah, playing it in the flutes instead of the strings, right? If this is an orchestral sonata form, or
And then I see reharmonization.
different chord progressions.
Okay.
So these are melodic themes, so we could harmonize them in a different way, and have different chord progressions underneath them.
Okay, so the melody stays true, but we tweak the harmonies beneath. Okay, and changing the character of the melody a bit.
Yep.
The final one I have here is contrapuntal combination of different motives, and that's got me a little confused. I don't.
Lining the motives on top of each other. So example in Bizet's Farandole suite, he has the two themes, bum ba da ba da 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 da, and then he has a but da 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 da. Hold on, he has da 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 da. Yeah, and those two things are playing at the same time, contrapuntal layering over each other.
Okay.
And so the P themes and the S themes can be doing this in the development.
Working in at the same time, in the same space. Yeah, okay.
Simultaneous playing off. Yeah.
So that's like a small list of many things that can happen within the development.
Right. The small list of things in our kind of anything goes. The big takeaway here is that it is these primary themes and S themes that are being played with in these various ways across these various keys that are that make up the development. One thing that does happen that your textbooks don't want to tell you about is new material can appear. Mozart was famous, some might say notorious, for bringing in a new melody in the middle of his development, something you had not heard before at all. Which would leave the Viennese audience of the time just gasping at the impropriety.
Well, sure.
Shocked to their core, right? Because this is not supposed to happen, but it is a thing that happened.
So the only thing I have left before we move on to the recap, I have that there's often a dominant prolongation, aka the retransition.
The retransition. So just as the transition was a movement away from the home key.
From primary to secondary?
To secondary, yeah. So primary and the home key, the transition, just as the transition was a move away from that home key, the retransition is movement back.
Okay, I did that.
Okay, good. And this move, and so this is a retransition. We are moving back to this home key. This is an extremely important moment in your sonata. Because what you are doing here is, remember when I said that the secondary theme, what it was some giant cliffhanger, right? What we really wanted was a 1 to end that 5 on, and we just haven't gotten it. We've gone off in 5, 5, 5, and then we've moved into the development, and we're not even 5 anymore. We're in 6 and 4 and 2, and we don't know what is going on. The retransition, we start to move back to that home key, and we'll end up on the 5 of that home key, and we'll really pound it home. 5, 5, 5, 5, 5. This is called dominant prolongation.
Yeah.
5, 5, 5. And then we finally get the release to our cliffhanger when that 5 moves into the next major section, which is
the recapitulation.
the recapitulation.
Yeah.
And starting with that primary theme in that home key, we get 5/5, and then 1 recapitulation. And hearing the primary theme in its home key again.
Uh-huh.
And this time, just like Dorothy, we are home now, but we are home and we have learned some things. And in the recapitulation, we are not going to fall off into the wrong key ever again.
Uh-huh. Yeah,
We
yeah.
have learned our lesson.
Not even for the B, not even for the secondary theme, it seems, right?
Exactly. Because we are going to follow what the exposition did to the letter.
Mm-hmm.
Primary themes. Yeah. Transition. Where everything kind of gets cloudy. But this time, this transition will be rewritten. And a lot of times composers will take this opportunity to throw in some new music, some fun new stuff that you haven't heard before, since they've got to rewrite the transition anyway.
Mm-hmm.
The transition is rewritten so that it does not modulate to a new key.
Yes.
But that it stays in that same key. It kind of twists back on itself in a way, so that it stays in that same key. And so when you get to that 5/5/5 this time, it's not the 5 of the 5 key. It is the key. It is the prime key.
Yeah.
So when we play the secondary themes now, the secondary themes are all in the same key as the primary theme was. Everything of the recapitulation, we get to those closing themes, we get to that hammering out of that cadence, 5/1, 5/1, 5/1, and it is in the proper home key. We have arrived. And then with that proper home key at the end of the recapitulation, 5/1, 5/1, 5/1, 1, 1, the sonata form is effectively over. Unless there is a coda, which, like the introduction, is optional. It can be there or not. There could be a coda that will even further drive home the having finally arrived at.
Which I did not do, but I did.
That one's optional. Optional.
I did do a kind of a 5/1 thing at the end, like I repeat myself 3 or 4 times just to drive it home. I thought I was being a little silly, but I think it's actually a common thing in classical music. So
you have to give our poor Viennese a signal as to when to clap. To quote Salieri from the movie Amadeus.
Really?
You underestimate our poor Viennese. You did not even give them a sufficient cadence, so they might know when to clap.
Salieri was Italian, am I right?
He was.
Yeah, it's a little bit of
conflict. And a little bit sarcastic.
Yeah, I love that character, and that in the movie.
Oh sure. Oh yeah.
Okay, man. Well, so in the recap, I guess just to drive it home, where we had in the exposition, you had you had the primary theme, which is usually in the home key. Secondary theme moves to either 5 or to the relative major if it's in minor.
Yes.
But when we come back to the same thing for the recapitulation, yes, we'll keep the primary theme, but the secondary theme, we can't go to that other key. We got to either stick around in the original key or with the original tonic, right?
That's an option, yeah.
Because I took that option. I actually ended up doing I was in A minor to C major for the exposition, and then in the recapitulation I did A minor and then A major.
Yeah. When you're in minor key, you tend to have a couple of more options with all of these things. So you can modulate to the minor 5 for the S theme in the exposition. That is the thing. Or you can modulate to the relative major. In the recap, the recapitulation, you can stay in the tonic. You can stay in the minor key, or you can preserve the mode of the original minor key or the original S theme and just have it played in the same tonic. So A major instead of A minor, but still having arrived at home, right?
Yeah. Well, very good. Is there anything else you want to say about that before I get into my little sonata here?
Just again, try not to think of this as just one section following another. Try to think of this as a narrative where we're presented with a home turf, to which our transition casts us away from, into this whole other place that is not our home turf, and then we find ourselves stuck in that.
Mm-hmm.
And that is the exposition. We then repeat that exposition, hoping it'll be different this time. It's not. We end up stuck.
Yeah.
We have this sort of crisis of faith, you could almost call it,
Uh-huh.
or identity crisis or something, where we're in all of these different keys, all of these things mashed together, running through this cloud of uncertainty, to which we arrive at this dominant prolongation. And that dominant prolongation reaffirms for us our key, where our home is. It points us back home, and we arrive forcefully into the recapitulation. And then we can do all this now. Whereas we failed before to end in the proper key, now we end in the proper key.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a point of departure, a digression through a different kind of place, and a return. Like I said, you can almost think of the hero's tale cycle. If anyone out there is fans of Joseph Campbell, it's almost that in music.
Mm-hmm. Very nice.
Yeah. A digression away from, and in case you don't have enough to think about yet, this is also an expanded version of the rounded binary form that we described at the beginning, right?
Right. Yeah.
A, B, A prime, right?
Mm-hmm.
A, exposition, B, A prime, development and recapitulation.
Absolutely, yeah. So, okay. So would we say that the A is the exposition, the B is the development, and the A prime is the recapitulation?
Exactly.
Okay. Makes sense to me. All right, man. Okay, well, I guess we go ahead and get into this, man.
I'm going to let you sort of call out a play-by-play, I suppose.
All right. So, this has been building up way too long in my mind. Kind of ready to get this over with.
The world premiere
of Jeremy's Sonata. And what did I name it?
Then the title is It's Not a Sonata.
Exactly. And I named it this because if I name it a sonata and it turns out to not be a sonata, I'll feel way worse than if I just go ahead and say it's not a sonata and it turns out to be a sonata, right?
Trying to hedge your bets over here is what you're doing.
Always thinking ahead, always preempting. So, I set out to do this, and I really did welcome the challenge. And as I got into it, I got frustrated, and there was times where I just got pissed, and I'd call you up. How come? And I
would just run my mouth in a very unhelpful fashion.
Sometimes helpful. Most times helpful. Oftentimes confusing. It seems like such a simple concept, but there's so much more to it.
Oh, it's really not. It's really not. It's really one of the most sophisticated concepts, at least in the form of music, that I know of.
Yeah. So what I ended up doing was I busted out my Muse score, and this is the first piece of music I ever wrote that I actually just did it all by note entry and didn't actually have any kind of concept or chord progression or melody in mind. I just sat down, and I think I even started doing harmonies and then went back and did melodies on top of the harmonies.
Fascinating.
Just to show you how much I kind of Frankenstein this whole thing together. And then when I got done, a little bit about the process. When I got done, I enter the MIDI information, and then I bring the MIDI information into Pro Tools, which is my digital audio workstation.
Mm-hmm.
And then where I can, I replace the MIDI notes with my actual physical performance. I was able to do all the left hand now, and anytime I do piano, I usually do a left hand track and then a right hand track because I'm not a great enough pianist to do those together.
Sure.
The left hand track throughout the piece was actually all performed, Oh
wow.
But when we get to the development, I had to surrender to the MIDI information for the proficiency of the piano material.
Okay. And
then I said, when I listened to the piano, I was like, well, me not being a great pianist, this just doesn't sound like excellent music to me, So what do? I add more stuff to it. I decided I was going to add the bass to it. And then I had just a sonata for piano and bass. And I thought to myself, well, that's just kind of weird. Bass by itself, bass without drums or percussion. So then I decided I had just enough time to add some drums in there. So it's going to be a really weird, it's not going to have a very... If you listen to this piece without the drums and bass, it actually sounds like classical music. I mean, for example, I had the Muse score right here. I'm just going to play.
Yeah.
This is the intro. And then when you get into the A material, we have this kind of.
Yeah, so we have the optional introduction,
So
and then we have what is our memorable
ah
P theme.
yes, and then we have that's the primary theme, and then we'll have the secondary theme. You'll hear this kind of thing.
C major.
Yep. So that'll be the secondary theme. And then the development, I'm just gonna leave that as a little bit of a surprise because I really like the way when it comes in, I just get a kick out of that.
All right.
So we had this opening theme. Some things you're gonna hear in the development is this whole. That's gonna come back. That's part of the intro. That's gonna come back later on in the development. And then there's this kind of reoccurring suspension between 2-1-6-5, 2-1-6-5, and that's going to be part of the main primary theme. You know, that kind of thing. And then you heard the secondary theme. This whole kind of shoot. That kind of thing.
And it's sort of what we were saying, and we a little bit dismissed it, but the second theme sort of being a transposition or variation of the primary theme.
Mm-hmm.
You know, that's sort of taking the sort of the and for and the 3/8 note rhythmic motive from the first theme and just sort of reimagining it melodically.
Yes, actually, a lot of my recurring themes are rhythmic in nature because there'll be times where you hear the it's like the downbeat, boom, ba-da, ba-da.
Yeah.
So that the melody actually comes in on the second beat, right?
Right, yeah.
That kind of thing. And so you'll hear that too. So I'm just saying all this to say that the development will contain some things that you're going to, recognize, hopefully.
Okay, good.
And I guess we could just go ahead and listen to it at this point.
Okay.
Now, what you said was it's more common for the exposition to actually be repeated fully.
Oh, yes, absolutely.
With or without the intro material, but
right.
The main point being once you get all the way through the primary and secondary material, where I wanted to, and I did go into the development, I should have actually gone back and done the whole thing over again, right?
Yeah.
To be more true to what a sonata form is.
Right, yeah.
Okay. All right, here we go.
So you get some points counted off for that. But...
All right. Hey, it's not a sonata. All right, no, let's see here. So anyways, I don't know if there's anything else to say, or if I should just go ahead and start getting into it. Go ahead and play it.
Yeah, let's get into it.
It is a 5-minute piece. I will play it all the way through. The primary and secondary theme repeat on top. I mean, they repeat after each other. They don't, so I'll be able to.
Would you like any commentary, or are we just going to listen to it and hold our comments till?
I'm going to try and give commentary, kind of describing what's going on. You know what I mean?
Okay. All right. Yeah.
We'll try and keep it kind of minimal just so the music can live,
Mm-hmm. Yep.
But I might be like A section, B section kind of thing.
Right. Got it.
But take notes because I'm sure there's going to be some things to share at the end. Okay. So without further ado, putting this off way too much. Ladies and gentlemen, it's not a sonata for piano, bass, and drums, or percussion, I guess I should say. By yours truly. Here's the intro. It's a 1 chord to a 6. Neapolitan. You can follow along on their website for the chords. Augmented chord. 5/7 chord. And primary theme. Repeating. Perfect cadence. Again. Half cadence. cadence. Transition.
Energy building, right? Yeah. Less. Yeah, there's motion forward. We're less stable here.
Yeah. So this is the secondary theme. And the relative major, which is C major. Half cadence. So again, 1, 3, 2.
And those are the chord progressions of the S theme, which is what we're in.
Yep. Quick little deceptive cadence. Now, transition towards the development.
Which is not a thing, but okay.
Oh, darn. Development. This is kind of its own thing here.
So we are cast into the unknown at this point, right? We are scrambling for.
Yeah.
Yeah. Where's our home key?
Totally. This is kind of its own thing. I'm borrowing this next part from the primary theme right here. And this is from the intro. Now, from the secondary theme. A little bit of counterpoint. Look out. It's coming up.
And one. We have made it home, haven't
Yeah. And all of a sudden it's like a Beatles song.
we?
But I do love the way this feels. I mean, we're kind of back in Kansas again. Transitioning.
Except the transition is rewritten.
Yeah. To end up in A major. Now we got the secondary theme in the original tonic A major. And that thing where we drive it home. So that thing we were talking about at the end, where you kind of repeat the 5-1, 5-1, 5-1 thing. Only I made it 2-5-1, 2-5-1.
Well, still.
There you have it, boys and girls.
There you have it indeed. Good job.
Thank you, thank you. You caught a couple of things.
I did?
Yes.
Oh, I love it when that happens.
So I think that what I did that I'm realizing you said something is not a thing. It's like when we were getting out of the secondary theme to get into the development, I put another transition in there that maybe didn't need to be there.
Well, yeah, if I were analyzing this, I would maybe call that just part of the development material.
Mm-hmm.
I certainly wouldn't think of it as a transition to the development. That's what's not a thing.
Okay.
I would probably just call that development.
Okay.
beginning there. And the fact that you move into E minor is just part of the craziness that the development does.
So then really the secondary material should have ended at the end of the C major kind of situation.
Right.
Is that what you're saying? So let's see
Yeah.
here. Backing up, if I had
And it kind of does. I mean, you kind of end with the perfect authentic cadence in C major, and then move on to something else. It sounded like.
yeah, totally. So I did end it with the perfect authentic cadence in C major, and then was when I went into this whole to get me
Right.
to. So we could just say that that's part of the. That's actually where the development begins, maybe.
Yeah, that would maybe be what I did.
Okay.
Because it is definitely different from the S theme material.
Absolutely.
And yeah, I would probably do that.
Okay. What else, man? Anything else catch your eye or your ear? Or
The
can I actually call this a sonata?
I think you can probably call it a sonata. I think
Uh-huh.
it's I've certainly seen things that follow the rules less than this that have been called sonata. So I think you could probably call this a sonata.
Uh-huh.
To my ears, it still greatly strikes my curiosity whether or not that development material is different enough that you could really call it new material.
Mm-hmm.
So, I'm shocked and appalled, Mozart, that the development is not tied down enough to the P theme and S theme material. But then again, the P theme and the S theme material are themselves sort of variations of each other. So there's only so much you can milk out of a single thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that strikes my ear not as a mistake necessarily, but something that's interesting.
Uh-huh.
We started this off with saying the beauty of sonata form is that it is sort of malleable, right? And it is thought of as a malleable thing that is you know applicable to a lot of different sort of creative ideas.
Mm-hmm.
Um, the thing I think that helps composers really get the most out of this form is when they're not thinking about it as a sequence of parts, like, well, this is the exposition part, and so I have to do this, this, and this. But as a narrative that is put together with using melodies and keys and cadences, that toy with our expectations that those cadences set up. The idea that we can play 2, 6, 2, 5, and then expect to hear a 1 chord, is the greatest psychological phenomenon of Western classical music. It is that well, I expect to hear this, that the composers will play upon, indefinitely, and to use the sonata form to play on those expectations, and in playing on those expectations to create a kind of musical story is where you get the most out of this form. Not in thinking of it as, well, this is this section and this is that section and things.
Which is hard for me to get away from.
Yeah.
It's hard for me to get away from, like I said earlier.
Yeah, well, we a big point that I want to make while I'm thinking about it, I suppose, is a lot of people out there may be listening to all of this and thinking, well, I'm not Mozart, I'm not a classical composer.
Right.
Why should I care about any of this? And that's a fair point. This is a style that is very, very old, and some could argue is specific to a very particular time and place.
Mm-hmm.
Being Europe, Central Europe, from roughly the late 17th into the through the 19th centuries. Now, that's a very specific sort of time period, a specific sort of place where this is especially relevant. But I would say that if you understand sonata, not in the way that we, the way we've been talking about, not as just a series of things you have to do, but as a way to create narrative, you can do this in your own music too.
Mm-hmm.
The fact that you're writing in a bluegrass style, or in an American folk music style, or in a pop rock style, or whatever. It doesn't mean that you can't take the lessons of the idea of music as narrative, of the
Right.
lessons of playing on your expectations.
Because it's
You
all about
know,
the form in the case of the sonata, right? I mean,
Right. Yeah. Well, the form actually comes later. Actually, I think they wanted to play on those expectations, and that's what created the form. They didn't start with, okay, we're going to create this form that does this and this and make everybody do that.
oh
Right.
yeah, right.
Everybody did that because it achieved this goal.
Mm-hmm.
So you can sit down to write your pop rock piece, and think of the verse as being in a key, and think of the bridge as being something that is harmonically ambiguous, and the chorus as being in a different key. And then how do you resolve that discrepancy by the end of the song?
Mm-hmm.
These are lessons you can take and move into any style. And the lessons of form are always the same lessons, right? Statement, digression, return, and you can take that into just about any style.
Mm-hmm. Because it's good storytelling, ultimately.
It's good storytelling. Yeah,
Very cool.
it's good storytelling.
Huh. Well, gosh. Let's see here.
I think we need to put the score to Jeremy's "It's Not a Sonata" on the website. I think the world needs to see this creation.
Yeah. Okay, so let me tell you a little bit about that too, because if you go to musicstudent101.com, go to this episode 93, and you'll see where I put the PDF, a very long PDF. How many pages? I don't even know how many pages this is. Many pages. But you can follow through.
Oh, it's only 5 minutes.
Now, here's the funny thing, Matt, because I was like, the whole reason I decided to write my own sonata was because you were showing me some examples of Mozart and Haydn and Beethoven. And I was like, geez, this is like 5 to 7 minutes. I got to do something shorter for the sake of explanation, And then mine turned out to be a 5-minute long sonata anyway. So really, I could have just used a Mozart sonata for an example.
I mean, 5 minutes is still very short for the sonata side. Just the very impetus of all the stuff you have to do, right, means you're going to kind of be writing a lot of music.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But on the subject, if you want good examples of sonata form, they are all over the place, right? One of my favorites to show people is Beethoven's Symphony No. 5 in C minor, the first movement.
Yeah, I think you showed me that one.
Yeah, very, very famous Beethoven's Fifth, right? Ba-da-da-da, ba-da-da-da. This piece of music, the first movement, is actually in sonata form, and you can listen to it and hear it go through these things. Start off in C minor, transition to E flat major, go through the development, and it's a good example because you don't really have to squint super hard to be able to hear these things. It's fairly, I mean, not completely obvious, but it's fairly discernible if you're listening, if you're paying attention and listening closely, that it's going through this thing. Jeremy's sonata is a fine example, and I hope you will put the audio file up along with the score so people can follow along.
I think what I might actually do is, just so they can hear it without being without me yapping during it and all that.
Yeah,
I might just, instead of having the outgoing bumper track with Mike taking us out, I might actually have the sonata, just play the sonata at the very end of this episode. So you can move on to the next podcast, or you can actually listen to the whole thing by itself and read along. When you look at the music that I've written, it's basically a textual reduction, really. I mean, I did not notate the bass line, okay? I did bass for fun. That's what made it I was like, okay, now that I tried this on this piano, which I kind of do okay at, maybe if I add an instrument that I can actually play, it'll make it sound more like music. But you'll see the melody will be on the top, and you'll see the chords on the bottom. So... And excuse a parallel fifth or two, because there might just be because it's not about that, right? It's about the form.
Points off.
I think I'm not going to grade myself, Matt, but if you were to grade me on this sonata in front of all these people, what would you give me?
Oh, you're going to make me be mean, huh?
Yeah. Oh, I didn't ask you to be mean. You were going to be mean?
No.
No,
No,
dude,
no, no.
I'm kidding.
I would definitely give you a solid B. It's definitely a
All right.
solid sonata. The development could have a little more to do with the original themes, and you could have repeated the whole exposition, not just fragments of it,
Yeah, yeah.
right? And so there's some things like that. But definitely a solid B.
Hey, many tests I walked proudly out of that classroom with a B on my paper with a big old smile on my face, and
There
I'd
you
say,
go.
"Hey, Matt, remember
Not that I would ever grade anyone on a composition. I actually don't do that, but
do you not?
not really. No, not really.
Because it's personal preference,
Yeah,
right?
well, I mean, how am I supposed to sit there and say, well, what you ought to do is this? I mean, I can tell you what people who've written in sonata forms do, but that doesn't mean that's what you should do,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm. Right, right.
So I actually don't really grade people on compositions. I grade them on their progress on their compositions, but not on the musical material.
All right, let's see if we can do a quick recap before we get out of here, if that's even
Okay.
possible. Recap on the recap.
Uh,
So yeah, hit us one more time just with the
the
sonata for
primary sections
s-
there of the sonata form.
sonata for dummies.
So okay, sonata for dummies. You have three primary parts of the sonata form. The first part is the exposition. In the exposition, you are introduced to two themes, one in the home key of the piece, one that by way of harmonic transition has found itself in a different key, usually the fifth or the relative major, although other things can happen.
Mm-hmm.
This is played through. This is ended. We find ourselves ending in the wrong key because the second theme ends in the wrong key. We then repeat this exposition to try to resolve this scenario, and we find that we fail again. We end up in the wrong key. So
Mm-hmm.
this amounts to a digression away from our home key. We have the second major section, which is the development, which having twice ended in the wrong key, we are now cast adrift moving through multiple keys in which our two themes from the exposition are played, fragmented, transposed, played into sequence, expanded or contracted, and then just generally messed with.
Mm-hmm.
You know, through a series of keys ending in a dominant prolongation, a five of that home key, which resolves forcefully into the one of the recapitulation, our third biggest section, which then plays the exposition exactly with the one major altercation that instead of transitioning to a new key, both of our themes are played in that original key. Having attained that original key after the development, we never stray from it again until the piece is over at the end of the recapitulation.
To
Upon
solidify,
and Yes, and we have the option of adding in a slow introduction to the beginning of this or a coda to the end of this.
which the introduction I did, but the coda I really didn't.
Yeah,
Right. I mean, I just
and
did
that and that
my little
yeah,
5-1 thing. Dun dun dun.
yeah, and that is the sonata form in a nutshell. There's a extraordinary amount of detail you can go into this. We did not even in this podcast, much like those authors of those theory textbooks, we did not get into everything.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, you cannot. If you want really detailed discussions, I would suggest Elements of Sonata Theory, as I did.
Mm-hmm.
And if you want to listen to the masterful composers play in sonata forms, there's all kinds of stuff. I would recommend the first movement of any of Beethoven's symphonies, but in particular the fifth. It's pretty easy to grasp. Or the first movement of any Haydn string quartets, or any Mozart symphony in G minor is famous and also pretty easy to grasp. Yeah. The first movement of the Scottish Symphony, Mendelssohn. I mean, I can go on and on and
Huh.
on.
Scottish Symphony.
Just pick a yeah. Don't get excited. It doesn't really sound Scottish. He was just in Scotland when he was just in Scotland when he wrote it.
No bagpipes.
He was just in Scotland when he wrote it. That's
All
all.
right. Oh well.
Oh well, yeah. But yeah, I could go on and list tons of examples, and then basically the first movement of anything written by Haydn, Mozart, or Beethoven, with some exceptions, but
Okay, one more thing.
Mm.
About at the end of the 10th or 10th or so phone call I made to you, hounding you about sonatas, which is just a couple of days ago. You had a
Which I can
question.
talk about this stuff all day, but
You had a question for me, Matt. What was that question?
So my question was, how did you enjoy writing a sonata? Did you enjoy it?
And I think when you first asked that question, I think I interrupted your question with a flat out no.
Absolutely not.
Absolutely not. But having finished this up, and it's like you say, once you're at the end of a project, you can look back and be way more happy with it, right? But going through it, it was painful.
everything is more fun to write after you're done writing it. Yeah, once you're done writing it, you can look back and say it was more fun to write than you ever thought it was at the time. That's a thing I've noticed.
But once I got them at the piano down and was finished with that part, and just got to actually start putting down a bass line, which I feel more comfortable with, and then when I got on the drums and started banging things around, that's when I really started enjoying it. And I came up with another kind of strange little piece of music that really I don't think it can be used for anything anywhere. If you listen to it, it might be fun for what we did with it, but it's just weird music. I don't know.
I don't know. Play the right hand of that piano on a guitar or something, and is it really that weird?
Maybe not. I don't know. But I did.
Yeah.
I kind of like what I came up with. Long story short,
I kind of like what you came up with too.
Yeah.
Whether it's a full-fledged classical sonata or not really doesn't matter to me. I think it's a fun little piece of music. So
yeah. So there you go. And if you guys want to hear this fun little piece of music, I guess that would be the time to do that. So give it a listen, read along on the website, and see what you guys think.
Absolutely. Yeah. And we will be back with other large forms. Sonata is only one, right? There is also the rondo form, the compound ternary form.
Oh, and there's also all these little subgenres like the minuet and the trio and things like that.
Minuet and trio. Yeah, that's actually a type of compound ternary, but we can absolutely talk about that. And
there's so much more to say about forms, but we are short on time.
You never really get done with it. You never really get done with it.
Well, I'm so happy we were able to actually get back into theory, and I know a lot of our listeners have been waiting for some theory. And
absolutely, it was nice.
We'll keep this ball rolling. It might be the same pace, maybe once a month, until we get more into a groove in the new year. But thanks again for sticking with us.
Thank you so much. We'll see you next time.